So way back in 2008, during the global recession, when fear was the second most traded currency behind oil, of course, I had an interesting interview with self-help expert and professional development speaker, John Assaraf. Some of you probably remember him from The Secret. And what we talked about, I don't think it changed my view on fitness and the domains and how expansive it could be, but it definitely reinforced it. If you remember back in 2008, like the world was panicking. People were pulling back on everything, marketing budgets, personal spending, especially gym memberships. And even optimism felt like it was a luxury item. So I asked John, what do you think people should be cutting back on in a crisis like this? And he said, well, let's take a look at what we can learn from what people never cut back on, especially in a financial recession. He said, if you take a look at the industries that are struggling in the midst of a financial recession, fitness being primarily one of them, because it was allocated as something that we use discretionary income for. He said, take a look at restaurants, take a look at the pub, take a look at the cinema. These businesses do particularly well when the economy does particularly bad because people are stressed. People are afraid. People are grappling. What they want is escapism. What they want is human connection with one another. What they want is to alter their emotional state from where it is to where they wish it would be. And he said, the last thing anyone should cut back on or spend less money on in a recession is health and fitness. I don't think many of you would disagree. I thought that was curious. He didn't say, well, diversify your portfolio, go out and buy gold, or stop drinking $5 cups of coffee at Starbucks every morning. His advice was, it's not about what you spend less money on. It's what you need to spend more money on. And that's fitness. So I asked him, well, tell us a little bit more about that. Like, why do you feel that way? And he said, well, when things get uncertain, your energy, your focus, your clarity, your cognitive fitness, all of that becomes a major competitive advantage. This becomes important to be able to compete in any domain in life, but especially when things are uncertain. I don't think many of you would disagree with that. I mean, it stuck with me because it made so much sense to me based on where I was sitting as a fitness professional and a presenter and a consultant in the fitness industry back then. It reframed fitness as being far more than beach muscles, weight loss challenges, and before after shots that so many people frame the industry as. In reality, it goes beyond that. It's about cognitive performance. It's about engagement, and it's about resilience. I mean, let's flash forward to today, not too far from being 2 decades later. Wow. And I'm talking to a senior leader of one of the largest health school districts in the state of California. And we were talking about well-being practices. And what he said to me was, sometimes when people are under so much stress and pressure in our district that everything seems additive, well-being doesn't feel like something you're doing for us. It feels like something you're doing to us. Then he paused and said, if you really cared about our well-being, you would focus on work satisfaction. You would focus on leadership. You would focus on conflict management. You would focus on stress management. And you know what? He was right. There's an ever-increasing amount of data that strongly suggests that this is the reality that so many of our clients, members, and potential members are struggling with. I don't think we've been thinking wrong in the fitness industry, but we have been thinking a little bit small. Many of us have defined fitness terms in concepts of sets and reps and calories burned and VO2 max. And I believe all of these things are critically important to optimal functioning. But what about the bigger scope of fitness? Well-being. Is that also about things like conflict resolution? Yeah, I think it is. What about cognitive endurance, emotional regulation, and human connection? What if the real purpose of fitness and the broader scope of well-being is to help people show up more fully, not just in the mirror, but in their relationships, in their jobs, and in every aspect of their lives that is critically important to them? Fitness in this broader scope isn't just about how we look at how many pull-ups we can do or how far we can run. It's the very infrastructure of our resilience, of performance, of satisfaction, not just at work, but everywhere else. So it's not a luxury allocated for discretionary income. It's not a line item. It's a leadership advantage that's critical for anyone who's feeling highly stressed today or highly uncertain in the working world at all levels of an organization. I mean, do you personally know anyone like that? Sometimes they have your surname and they live in your household. Sometimes it's the person that's looking us in the mirror. We can all relate to this reality that people are struggling with. I think fitness is the answer. So, what are we really talking about here? Let's be honest. The word health gets tossed around more than confetti at a wedding. Everybody talks about they want more health, but if you were to ask 5 people, what does health actually mean to you? You'll get 7 different answers in a smoothie recipe. When we say things like health is wealth, what are we talking about? Most of these definitions are frustratingly vague, and they're wildly inconsistent from one person to another. Technically, the World Health Organization defines health as a complete state of physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. That's beautiful, but it's also particularly broad. What does that actually look like in someone's life day to day? And that's where Gallup, yes, the same Gallup that's been polling the human race for about 90 years, steps in with something a little bit more useful. I had the pleasure of giving a presentation alongside a senior consultant for Gallup. And prior to the talk, I had a little bit of time to talk to her. And I asked her how she defines Gallup's definition of well being. And she said, well being is the ability to engage with everything that's important to you. In other words, everything and everyone that you love. It's what you think about most of the time and the experience of being you. That includes everyone. When people take a look at fitness as something that is nice to do, but not necessary to do or not urgent to do right now, they're looking at the context in which we've defined it. They're not looking at it in the context of everything and everyone that they love, what they think about most of the time in the experience of what it's like to be them. That's powerful. In the book Wellbeing at Work, authors Clifton and Harder analyzed data from over 100 million interviews across more than 150 countries, representing 98% of the world's population. And they came to one powerful conclusion: that job satisfaction is the single greatest predictor of overall well-being. It wasn't income, wasn't body fat percentage, and it wasn't the number of downward dogs that you do every day before 6 a.m. It's whether or not you feel like your work matters. And that makes sense to people who are in the fitness industry, doesn't it? I mean, most people spend more waking hours working than we do anything else. So if our experience is miserable or meaningless or draining, it doesn't just stay at the office or wherever your proverbial office might be. It bleeds into your sleep, your relationships, your energy, your hope. Which brings us to Gallup's modern framework of well-being. And this is a framework that really changed how I look at this industry. They define well-being across 5 essential elements. Number 1 is career well-being. Do you like what you do every day? Second is social well-being. Do you have meaningful friendships and support? 3 is financial well-being. Are you effectively managing your money and stress? And those 2 things can be highly interrelated. Physical well-being. Do you have enough health and energy to do what it is that you truly find meaningful to do what you really want? And finally, the 5th one is community well-being. Do you feel safe, valued, and connected where you live? And here's where it gets interesting for all of us that work within the domain of the fitness industry. We've been focusing almost entirely on that 4th pillar, physical well-being. We've built entire businesses, certifications, and Instagram platforms around it. But most people, they live and work across all 5. And here's our opportunity. When we expand the lens to include these other domains, we train not just bodies, but the human beings that reside within them. We don't just get better client results. We change lives at the root level. Because it's the person who's strong in the gym but weak in their relationships, or dreading Monday every single week, or they go to bed and they wake up terrified about money. That's the individual that no matter how many push-ups they can do, they're not thriving. And if we claim to care about health, we can't ignore well-being. So the question becomes, are we helping people lift more, or are we helping them live more? Both of which are probably a pretty good idea. So let's take a look at the science of flourishing. Let's talk more about this word that gets utilized so often. It's almost lost all of its meaning. Well-being, right? It's bastardized and utilized so ubiquitously that, like health, we struggle to define it, or if we can define it, we're all over the shop. In most fitness spaces, we throw it around like it's interchangeable with health or positivity. But what is well-being really? According to Dr. Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology, well-being isn't about just simply feeling good. It's about functioning well. In other words, it's about thriving. It's about really being able to feel fully alive whilst you're living. And he mapped out a framework that he calls PERMA, the acronym PERMA, and he outlines 5 pillars that support and create sustainable, holistic well-being. Let's take a look at the P in PERMA, positive emotions. These are where we experience things like joy, optimism, and gratitude far more than we do negative emotions. Not saying that we don't experience negative emotions, that's part of life and different seminar, but negative emotions can actually be quite useful for our sense of well-being, resilience, and life experience. But it's just that the ratios of positive to negative emotions are disproportionate. We might experience positive emotions to negative emotions on a ratio of 3 to 1 or 5 to 1. The second pillar is the E in the acronym PERMA, and that stands for engagement. This is when you're so absorbed in an activity that's important to you that time disappears. You're at your best and you're most alive in these moments. He's talking about the ability to get into flow states. And then the R stands for relationships. This is our deep, meaningful connections that we have with other people that are important to us. The M is meaning. It's a sense of belonging to something that's bigger than yourself. This is what Dr. Viktor Frankl was talking about in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, when he said that success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as an unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. And finally, the last letter in the acronym PERMA is accomplishment. A. This is, are we progressing? What are we achieving? And are we developing a sense of mastery in the domains of our life and work that we deem as important? So now I want you to pause for a second and think about what that might mean for our industry. Most people assume that we operate in the space of positive emotion in terms of the endorphins we release resulting from a great workout, right? Or an accomplishment, or hitting a PR, or dropping 10 kilos. That's pretty ambitious. Even 5 kilos, or completing a 5K. And all of those things are phenomenal. But what if we're perfectly positioned to support all 5? When we create workshops that challenge, or workouts or spaces, environments that challenge people without overwhelming them, we foster engagement. When we build a culture where our members connect to one another, support and cheer each other on, we nurture relationships. As a matter of fact, my definition of a community is when you have a group of people gathering together for a common purpose. And that could be like, think about any group exercise workout or any group X class that you have in your facility. When that group of people gets to know each other to the point where they're not only showing up for their experience and their outcomes, but they are mutually invested in the outcomes and experience of one another and celebrate them, that's when they go from being a group to a community. When somebody comes in after a brutal day and they say, "Oh, this is the one place where I feel like myself, where I can recharge or return to what's most significant," that's meaning. And yes, we deliver accomplishment and positive emotion every time someone walks out feeling better than they walked in, which I would imagine is the majority of times. So you're not just in the body business, you're in the business of building lives that work. That's where well being matters because no one walks into your studio to just like get toned. They come in to feel capable. They come in to take control. They come in to feel something other than stuck. And when we design experience that support all five dimensions of well-being, we're not just selling fitness, we're offering resilience, self-trust, and a better version of life. We're also offering job security because we are building the internal resources that allow people to perform in an increasingly competitive workspace. And when something changes, they can adapt to those changes. That's resilience. And that's not just found in a class. That's a value proposition that people can't possibly put a price on. Let's explore a little bit more about what Gallup found. So, if you're not tying fitness to functional well-being, you're leaving transformative value on the table. Let's talk data, not reps, not micros, not heart rate zones, but let's talk about the numbers that are redefining what it is to create value in the lives of the people that we serve. So again, let's go back to the book Well-Being at Work, where Gallup's Clifton and Harder offer a bold evidence-based conclusion after analyzing millions of interviews across countries, industries, and cultures worldwide. Again, work satisfaction is the number one driver of well-being. Not sleep, not diet, not even exercise. That would have been the top three on my list, right? And at the very least, it's not any of these in isolation. And this is because how people feel about what they do all day influences every other domain in their life. It has a profound ripple effect because work is where, again, we spend the bulk of our waking lives. And if that experience is toxic, meaningless, or exhausting, or you just can't seem to perform well in that domain, it doesn't matter how fit you are, the rest of your life will feel as if you're unwell. But here's where it gets exciting for us. The inverse is also true. When well-being is high, job performance, job satisfaction, and engagement, they all increase. Are you thinking what I'm thinking at this point? That means for anyone working today who wants to succeed or wants to avoid the consequences of not being able to perform, fitness professionals, we become more relevant than going to 1,000 sales workshops or reading professional development books. All that stuff's important, but I look at it kind of like, well, I don't have my smartphone, but you probably have a smartphone on you. Like, take a look at that phone, what model it is. Think about this for a second. If you got a software upgrade and you downloaded it, you would probably notice, oh, wait, my phone is working a little bit better. Wow. Okay, that's kind of cool. A couple of months later, you get another software download. You download that. Now your phone seems like it's speeding up. So it's working better and it's working faster. Well, you keep doing this. 2 downloads later, you kind of feel like, wait, is my phone slowing down? And then the next download, hold on, this thing seems glitchy. And the more downloads that you accept, the worse your phone starts to perform. Why is that? Well, some people say it's because they build in obsolescence to the phone. But what's more likely happening is if you still have the same old model, your operating system is outdated and not able to fully integrate the more advanced software downloads. So sales training, going through learning how to become better at operations, marketing, accounting, all of those become the software downloads. Where fitness and well-being, we help to upgrade the operating system to allow people to flourish as a result of the software they're downloading, if that makes sense. And that's where fitness and well-being professionals, you and I, have the power to become absolutely indispensable. So let me give you a couple of numbers that should grab your attention. Employees that work who are thriving in their overall well-being, they are twice as likely to self-report being engaged at work. This means that they're more productive, they're more creative, and they're more loyal. That's the exact outcome that every employer wants. And let's talk about burnout and disengagement. According to Gallup, they're more costly to organizations than most chronic illnesses. Let that sink in for a second. Employee disengagement costs the global economy the equivalent of nearly $9 trillion a year. I think that's somewhere around 11% of the global GDP. Now, the emotional and cognitive toil of stress, well, that becomes draining on organizations, not just individuals. And what we do in your gym, your facility, that can be the antidote to all of it. Because here's what I'm thinking. If you're in fitness and you're not tying what you do into functional well-being, you're not helping clients utilize their training as a tool for resilience, clarity, and performance in work and life. So, this is the bridge between what we've always done, help people look and feel better, and what the world requires from us now. Help them recover better, help them think clearer, avoid burnout, build resilience, and stay in the game emotionally, mentally, physically, and socially as well. Because that's what well-being is. It's not just about how we look or even how we feel, as important as those two things are. It's about how we function, especially under pressure. And if we as an industry step into that space, we don't just stay relevant, we become more vital than we have ever been. So let's take a look at what clients are really asking for in 2025 and how fitness is the answer to it. Somebody might walk into your gym or facility and say, I want to tone up, I want to get back on track. But behind the surface level goals, here's what they're actually craving and saying louder than ever. In all of the industries that I work across, the most common request is burnout prevention, emotional resilience, conflict resolution, which is an indicator they're not just looking for fitness, that what they are looking for is a way to stay in their lives without falling apart. And here's the good news. Everything that they want are physiologically trainable. And the gym is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful place to do it. And, let's break down what I mean by that. Let's take a look at number one, burnout prevention. Burnout prevention, in my mind, equals self-regulation plus recovery. Burnout is not just exhaustion. That is an oversimplified definition of something that is highly complex. More accurately, what burnout is a chronic unmanaged stress that leaves the body and the brain in a sustained state of fight or flight or freeze. And this is where fitness becomes more than fitness, because what we can do through everything that we offer is we can offer exercise that regulates the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And that's your body's stress response system. Regular movement trains your body to respond to stress without overreacting to it. And it releases atrial natriuretic peptides, which help to modulate the HPA axis to cut back or decrease the levels of cortisol in your body at any one time. Movement also boosts brain-derived neurotropic factors, or BDNF, if you like, which supports learning, adaptability, and emotional resilience, all of which are depleted when you're burnt out. And most importantly, recovery. Through sleep, breath work, and nervous system regulation, we can help people build their individual capacity. So yes, sleep and rest days are a part of training, because really resilience isn't just simply a mindset. It's a physiological state that you build through repeated recovery. So let's take a look at a second domain where we can be extraordinarily valuable: emotional resilience. I'm going to define this as emotional resilience equals self-regulation plus clarity. Clients want to feel less reactive. They want to feel more grounded. And that starts with self-regulation. And again, this is neurobiological. High-intensity interval training that's mixed with progression strategies that safely challenge proprioception and motor control increases prefrontal cortex activation. This is the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control and decision-making. So practices like mindful movement and breathing and doing those types of exercises decrease activity in the amygdala. And your amygdala can be thought of as your internal alarm bell. It kind of shifts the body from a sympathetic stress to a parasympathetic calm state, because the greater the activity in the amygdala, right, the lower the activity in the prefrontal cortex. The higher the activity in the prefrontal cortex, the lower activity in the amygdala. And when you start to ask meditative questions, or you even start to regulate your breathing, you induce what's called a polyvagal state that decreases amygdala activity and moves your client into a state of calm or a parasympathetic state. That's not self-care as we look at it. It's nervous system training as well. So when clients practice staying calm under load, literally, they're wiring themselves to handle the emotional intensity with more grace and reactivity. Here's the third place where we can add value: conflict resolution. Because look at it this way: conflict resolution can equal energy plus perspective plus presence. So you might not be teaching de-escalation tactics. That would be a little bit weird in a personal training session. But here's what you are doing: you're giving clients mental clarity, which helps them respond rather than react. You're improving physical energy, which reduces irritability and increases patience. So supporting better sleep and recovery, which enhances executive function in the parts of the brain that help people hold opposing views, help them stay present enough to listen and make decisions under pressure. Wow, that's kind of cool. So, because in other words, your training floor is helping people to become better coworkers, partners, and leaders, not just stronger or better looking lifters. So let's reframe something for a second. Let's reframe fitness as the lab where life gets easier because we're getting better. So when clients say that they're overwhelmed, burnt out, and emotionally frayed, they don't necessarily need a mindset workshop. What they might need is physiological support. What they might need is movement, recovery, breath, nutrition, and structure, all of which you already provide if you frame it that way. See, fitness isn't just about the outputs, it's about restoring capacity. It's about where people rehearse stress in a controlled setting so they can handle it better when life throws it at them in an uncontrolled environment. It's where they learn to reset, not just push through. And this is why fitness professionals are not just part of the well-being conversation, we're central to it. So back in the late 1900s, early 1900s, I'm like a century ahead of myself in this seminar. There was a company called Schlitz Beer, and it was an American beer company, and it was really crowded in a growing number of American breweries, and it was kind of struggling to stand out. And the quality was there. I know what you're thinking, and you're probably right. But anyway, by these standards, the beer was clean, it was crisp, it was refreshing, it was brewed with meticulous care, but sales were really lagging. So that's when Schlitz brought in a consultant. This consultant was most likely the famed Claude C. Hopkins. He was an individual that became famous for having a sharp marketing mind with a really keen eye for overlooked stories. And as he started touring the Schlitz facility, he noticed something extraordinary. He noticed that the brewery steamed every bottle to sterilize it. He noticed that the water utilized in brewing was filtered not once, not twice, but 4 times. The air in the bottling room was even purified. Every step of the process screamed precision and purity, and the consultant was stunned. So he asked, "Why are you not telling people about this?" And Schlitz's brewmaster at the time just shrugged and said, "Well, because it's nothing special. Every brewery does this." "Exactly," the consultant replied. "But the public, they don't know that." That one insight changed everything. So Schlitz took the consultant's advice, and their next ad campaign didn't brag in vague slogans. It told a story of how Schlitz beer was purified, filtered, and sterilized and cared for at every step, so that the taste and experience was magnificent, and it turned into what was once considered standard practice into a compelling narrative of quality and consumer trust. And the results were staggering. Within just months, Schlitz catapulted to the number 2 beer in America. And again, I know what you're thinking. And that just, in my mind, only makes the story a lot more compelling if you think about it, and relevant. So how do we integrate well-being into every session? Let's start by talking about something which elevates your role from fitness professional to life catalyst, which is integrating well-being directly into your sessions without adding more time, but by increasing far more impact. Because if we're going to be honest, a lot of people don't come to the gym just to change their bodies, right? I think I'm even being a little bit redundant on this point already. They come in to change how they feel, and they come in so they can show up more fully in their lives. And how can we help them do that? Well, number one, start with breath. Modulate stress before you load your client. Before the warm up, we can make it a practice to take 60 seconds for intentional breathing, a slow inhale through the nose, and a controlled exhale that's longer in duration through the mouth. Maybe you could do something like 3 to 6 breath cycles in total. Now, here's why this is important, because breath is the fastest way to shift the nervous system from reactive to responsive, or it's one of the fastest ways. Not to mention, it's pretty valuable for facilitating safe and effective movement patterns. So you could say something like, let's take a minute just to breathe, just to drop in and be present with your body, shake off the day, and give yourself permission to be just here. That one moment of grounding can completely reframe the session from something they're doing to a space where they're becoming. Number 2, reinforce strengths, confidence over critique. So progress isn't just physical, it's emotional. What we could do is make a standard practice of calling out wins as they happen, saying something like, wow, Jane, that was really tough, but you didn't bail. What I did observe is you adjusted and stayed with it. That's adaptability. That's perseverance. You were tired today, but you still showed up. That's not just discipline. That's reflective of a commitment to yourself. This isn't fluff. This is actually incorporating something called appreciative inquiry, which is a school of coaching and therapy that facilitates sustainable change by focusing on someone's strength, allowing the client to recognize, internalize, and reproduce those strengths to create discipline on demand, perseverance on demand, success, creativity on demand. It's reinforcement. It creates a pattern of self-trust, which becomes the bedrock of that client's level of confidence. You're not just building stronger bodies when you engage in coaching strategies like appreciative inquiry. You're helping to build people who believe in themselves under pressure. Number 3, we can make it a practice of focusing goals around life performance, not just fitness goals like fat loss, not ignoring those, but incorporating and transcending it. So let's go beyond the scale, the mirror, body fat percentage. We could ask, what's the one thing you want to show up for stronger at work this week? Right? See what's really important to them. What is the client aspiring to, or what are they really anxious about? You can also ask, is there a conversation or challenge that you've been avoiding that you want to prepare for mentally or emotionally? Another question could be, what emotional or mental state would you need to be in if you were to show up at work in the way you really want to, in a way that will really matter to your identity, your career, your family 1 year from now, right? So the next question is ask what state the client is in the beginning of the workout. Then at the end of the workout, ask again, right? So what are you feeling emotionally, mentally? And on what scale? Is that like a 10, a 1? Then at the end of the workout, ask them again, because most likely their emotional state or mental state will have improved or at least changed for the positive after engaging in the workout. And then you could ask them a question like, how could the state you're in now support the experience and outcomes at work that are most important to you, as opposed to the state you were in when we first started? And of course, it doesn't have to be, at work. It could be something they're experiencing at home. Temporal discounting is an individual's tendency to place greater value on things that are in the near future versus the long term. So when you engage in questions like this, you're not only linking the value of the gym to a deeply important area of the client's life, like career, you're also supporting motivation by creating an immediate link to benefits in the very near future. So now suddenly that set of lunges isn't just about toning thighs, it's about building the stamina to handle the Friday meeting without shutting down. This is what we could call the functional fitness for real life. Number four, translate gym wins into life wins. So after a tough session, don't just say, "Hey, that's a really nice job. You know, see you on Wednesday, Bill." Anchor the win. Try this. You pushed through a set that you didn't think you could finish today. Where else in your life do you think that level of focus and grit is useful? Or you found your breath again when things got chaotic. You composed yourself, you got right back into the workout. Where else this week can that mindset help you? These are micro coaching moments, small intentional questions that create massive levels of self-awareness, and they're the glue between the reps and the real world. So as we start to wrap up, let's talk about why this matters. When you integrate well-being into your sessions through breath, through strength spotting, purposeful goals, and micro reflections, you're not just training someone to lift, you're training someone to live better. You're not just changing their body, you're upgrading, again, that operating system. In December of 1825, a very reluctant ruler took the throne of Russia. Tsar Nicholas I was the youngest of his brothers, and he was never really meant to rule. He never really wanted to rule. But when his elder brother, Alexander I, died unexpectedly from typhus, the crown fell into Nicholas's lap, and with it, all of that crushing weight of the autocracy. It was something he never wanted. And to make matters worse, within weeks of his coronation, an attempted military coup called now the Decembrist Revolt tried to unseat him. Nicholas managed to crush the rebellion, but he never forgot it. He remained pretty sensitive to all things rebellion throughout the rest of his life. And, like the rest of his reign, the threat of revolution haunted him like this shadow. He started to see enemies in ideas, traitors in words, and danger in thought itself, which brings us forward in time to April 23rd, 1849. That's the day that Fyodor Dostoevsky, the future literary giant, was arrested. And, at the time, he wasn't yet the author of renowned works such as Crime and Punishment. He was just one of many young thinkers in what's now called the Petrovsky Circle, a group of progressive intellectuals who met to discuss, of all things, ideas. And they read banned books, they discussed difficult questions, and they dreamed about a world filled with reform. And for this, they were branded revolutionaries. Now, Dostoevsky and his fellow co-conspirators were thrown into solitary confinement. They had no trial. They had no sentence, just silence. For 8 long months, they sat in their cells, uncertain about whether or not they were just being forgotten or maybe they were being prepared for a far more severe punishment. Then, on a bitter November morning, the prison doors cracked open. They were loaded into carriages. And by the way, they were still dressed in their spring clothes that they wore on their first day of the arrest, which was now completely useless against the Siberian winter. And as they were being driven through the streets, the men guessed that, this punishment, it was severe enough. They thought, I think we're finally being released. Well, they were wrong. At Alm Square, they were met not by their freedom, but by a priest offering last rites. That's never really an encouraging sign in any situation. Their charges were read out loud. Treason. The sentence, death by firing squad. In disbelief, these terrified men were marched to the execution sites. Hoods were placed over their heads. They could hear the sound of the rifles being loaded. They could hear the officer calling out, "Ready, aim." And in that moment, that singular, impossible moment, Dostoevsky recalled that he wasn't overcome by fear. He was overcome by clarity, by a love for life. He had this deeply rooted regret for all the time that he believed he wasted, the beauty he ignored, the happiness that he postponed. And just before the final command, before the shots that would end their life, there was a drum roll. A messenger from the Tsar arrived, dramatically on horseback, of course, and he carried with him a pardon. See, the whole execution was a lie. It was a stage performance ordered by the Tsar himself to make an example of the prisoners. All of this just to make a point. I personally think that a harshly written letter probably would have sufficed. The real sentence, though, was their exile. They were sentenced to years of hard labor in Siberia, which is why they were imprisoned there. And two of the men completely lost their minds from that level of trauma. But Dostoevsky, he was reborn. Later in a letter that he wrote to his brother, he said that when I look back on my past and I think about how much time I wasted and how little I appreciated it, my heart bleeds. Life is a gift. Life is happiness. Every minute can be an eternity of happiness. And from that moment on, he lived as if he really meant it, not in denial of hardship. He suffered deeply for the rest of his life, but he also lived with meaning, with presence, and in the midst of it all, with a sense of gratitude, creating a prolific body of work. So what does all this have to do with well-being or work or fitness? And in my mind, everything, because what Dostoevsky experienced in that moment, that searing awareness of what truly matters, the cost of disconnection and the urgent call to live on purpose, that's the very essence of well-being. You know, in Wellbeing at Work, Clifton and Harder present decades of research that shows something that's so surprisingly simple, that the quality of our life depends on the quality of our work experience, and that the quality of our work depends on how alive we feel, how alive and engaged we are while we're doing it. And people aren't just burnt out because they're working hard. They're burned out because they're working disconnected from purpose and depleted of meaning. And in a way, they're not just detached from their work, but they're detached from themselves. And just like Dostoevsky's moment of awakening, people today are awakening to this truth that life is too short and too precious to spend it exhausted, unseen, and uninspired. And that's where well-being comes in. It's not a perk. It's not a poster that their companies put in the break room. It is a philosophy. It is the DNA of who we are, how we think, and what we do, and how we engage in life. When we invest in well-being at work, when we create space for breath, reflection, connection, recovery, and purpose, we help people to come back to life before the metaphorical firing squad of burnout gets to them. We don't need to stage mock executions to remind people what really matters. And, least of all, because that would probably be an HR nightmare. We just need to create environments that don't make them forget. This is why well-being isn't soft, it's vital. It's because a workforce that's alive mentally, physically, and emotionally is a workforce that performs, contributes, and matters. So as we begin to wrap this up, I just want to leave you with 3 key takeaways. Not ideas to think about later, but decisions to make about how you see your work, your business, and your role, and what's coming next. Takeaway number 1, well-being is not an option. It's no longer a perk allocated for discretionary income or a luxury. It's something reserved, not just for New Year's resolutions. It becomes the foundation of people who want energy focus, collaboration, who really want to be able to show up at work, and who really want to be able to show up in their lives. It's for people that live in a world that's burning them out faster than they could recover. Well-being is not a nice to have. It's basically a non-negotiable. Takeaway number 2 is fitness professionals are uniquely positioned to lead this evolution. We already have the tools. We understand the physiology, performance, and we can do the same with habit change and human behavior. What we need now is a shift in our perspective, because we're not just helping people lift more. Again, we're helping them carry more in their lives. And this isn't just the evolution of our industry. It becomes the expansion of our purpose. And takeaway number 3 is reframe what it is you offer, right? You're not just an owner or an operator. You're not just a trainer. You're not just a rep counter. You're not a weight loss technician. You're a guide to clarity, strength, regulation, purpose. You're a guide to the life your client wants and has nearly given up on. This is like a really different type of transformation. It's not one that's measured by tape measures and scales, but one that's measured by presence, energy, and joy. So here's the question, and it's not rhetorical. It's the one that matters the most as we move forward. If well-being is the future of work, how will your fitness business be an integral part of that emerging future? Thank you.